I am a visionary. I'm a person who has big ideas, big dreams, motivation. I can get big relationships. I can harness capital. But the day to day, I get bored. I'm not as detail oriented. And so I've surrounded myself now with these people who are integrators. These are people who can execute on these ideas.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I'm your host, as always, Yona Weiss. Grateful to be here today with Dr. Vikram Raya. I am so excited to have you on the show after all these years. How are you?
Yona, it's a blessing and a pleasure to be here. I just appreciate all the things you're doing for our industry, and I'm just excited to have a strong conversation with you.
Likewise, you yourself have done a lot for this industry as well, and grateful to share the mic with you and just kind of get to know a little bit about your background. As I mentioned, doctor, right? You are by training a cardiologist, a physician who's been in practice for quite a while, but have transitioned and are really, focusing heavily in the past several years on real estate investing. And I mean, that's not the normal progression for most medical professionals. So I'm really curious to know kind of your background and where you got your first interest in the real estate world.
Yeah, I really love cardiology, and it was a fun and a really challenging thing to get into. And I did it because I had personal reasons. I had family members who had died of heart attacks, and that spoke really deeply to me. And I wanted to help them. And so I studied this field, and then I just thought it made sense to go into the profession. But when I started practicing, I noticed that my colleagues were scrambling, chasing quote unquote money. They were trading hours for dollars. They were living a lifestyle that was not conducive to this ideal version of being a physician that I thought, when I signed up for the job. And the other thing was, they had visions of maybe practicing in a better way where maybe they were reversing disease or promoting more health versus throwing pills at people. And I was like, but that to go after that new way of medicine would be a risk because that's sort of untested, uncharted waters.
Right.
So,
it was something unconventional, at least to what the medical profession had been doing and pushing for a century.
And so I wanted to solve two problems with one stone. So what I decided to do was, one, I wanted to figure out alternative streams of income. So that one, I had safety, I had multiple streams of income, I could accelerate retirement, I could have flexibility, optionality, and freedom. And the second thing was, hey, could I maybe take all this years of training, 26 years of training, and then start, getting specialized in a way where I would take care of people more naturally, where I learned about functional medicine, integrative medicine, reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes, reversing metabolic syndrome. And so it was almost like by me freeing up bandwidth and income requirements here, I can actually go and pursue my passions. And that's where real estate came in. I tried doing options trading, Yona, and I got my butt handed to me severely. And I was like, this is too complicated. I don't understand this. And I don't know that many options or stock millionaires, but I do know a lot of real estate millionaires. And so, you go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated.
That's a great way of looking at it. And it is difficult. I mean, any field, really, there are so many things people can do to become millionaires and have different streams of income, right? But you really have to learn it. And the great thing that I love about real estate is that it's not rocket science. I mean, it really isn't. You can really learn a lot and do a lot and create wealth, tremendous wealth, without being, the smartest guy on the block. And I mean, not to say that you don't have to have training and you don't have to have that experience to really build that wealth, but having the medical background, you're a smart person. It's not like, but options trading is something that I think requires a very, very specific skill set. And more than anything, even like an emotional kind of balance to be able to handle that.
Yeah. And then I think you're sort of married to the screen. You're like monitoring your trades. And again, the reason why so many people flock to real estate is obviously that you're able to do some of it actively, some of it passively, some of it with leverage. And that's one thing, Yona, I've been starting to learn over the years. In medical school, you learn to become a specialist. You learn to become an artist, if you will. All your inputs equal your outputs. And as I learn entrepreneurship and real estate, I'll learn that, hey, look, I can use labor as leverage. I can use, capital as leverage. And now I'm learning to use, and what you've mastered, Yona, is media, right? You've learned to use media as leverage. And with artificial intelligence, you don't necessarily need code, but with AI, you can use technology and sort of, non-code tech to expand your reach, your message, and your inputs. And so now, I'm probably working the same amount of hours or less than as a cardiologist, but the outputs in terms of reach, in terms of income, in terms of flexibility, in terms of asset accumulation, in terms of income streams has obviously multiplied.
Absolutely. So what was your first foray into real estate? And I'd love to hear that story because right now
Yeah.
you're not only have become very successful in the real estate game, but are now helping others and teaching and coaching others to do that. So I'd love to hear kind of where you started.
Yeah, I just made a decision. I didn't know, it's sort of like throw your hat over the fence and then go run and chase it. So I was like, all right, I know I'm going to do this. I just don't know how. So the number one tool for your listeners is declaration. Declare it. Next is, all right, just take some small micro action toward your goal, And so I was like, all right, I wanted to get into real estate. I didn't know how to do. I went to a local real estate investment association meeting. So back before there was meetups, back before there was bigger pockets, back before there was all of this real estate, availability, it was just these real estate investors who would meet up at, these rental buildings, and they would talk about real estate, talk about wholesaling. There was no short-term rentals back then, none of that, right? So I thought I'm going to become a wholesaler where I'm going to get a deal under contract and flip it to somebody else and take a little bit of a profit. I realized that that's a very labor and time intensive thing. And while I was in the middle of my busy practice, it was impossible for me to pull it off. And so I quickly dismissed, after trying it for about 3 months, I dismissed the idea. Then I realized that DC, Northern Virginia, Maryland, where I live, is very expensive to buy real estate. This was in about 2012 timeframe. So I thought, hey, my dad's in Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta. Let me partner with him. And so our first home was a $28,000 home. And I was worried. I was stressed. I didn't have that much money. My wife told me if we use my name or my personal income or our social security number, she's not going to be very happy. And so I had to use creative financing. And so string together a couple of credit cards. And then we just ended up buying that deal, and we're so nervous and worried about it, and ended up selling it for about $80,000 like 3 or 4 years later with all the renovations and the rehab and all that. So that's what like my first taste of freedom. But then fast forward a couple of years, we did like a portfolio of 30 homes, but there's no equity, Yona. What happened was, take the money from one, put in the next one.
Right.
The cash flow was anemic because we were using hard money loans and all that. And I'm like, dude, this is not going to get me to my goals. It's nice. It looks cute on paper. Right. Dr. Raya, 30 properties. But I was still living off of my cardiology salary. This was just there. And it was too leveraged out and too much interest I was paying on loans. So then I was like, all right.
That sounds like a lot of work also. I mean, for little return.
And then this guy from Boston had flown into my local real estate investment meeting and was talking about syndications and multifamily and buying 100-unit property. And it sounded exciting. It sounded sexy, but it also sounded illegal. And they're like, they're going to pay you for what? And how many ways they're going to pay you and all this? I'm like, okay, well, that thought stuck to me. And then after I hit this 30-unit portfolio plateau, I was like, you know what? We got to maybe shift the formula, and then started exploring multifamily.
I mean, how long did it take you to make that kind of mind shift switch to from this sounds illegal, this sounds like crazy that this guy is touting you can buy 100-unit property, to actually getting into your first deal?
Yeah, about 2.5 years, 3 years.
Wow.
And the reason why is it was mindset. I didn't have the mindset to wrap my head around that kind of thing. I didn't have the mindset of believing in my own capabilities, of learning that the best skill to learn is becoming a learner, like a meta learning, learning the power of mentorship. Like, so now you tell me, hey, you want to become, a scuba diver. Okay, cool. I'll probably pick it up in 90 days. You want me to become an insurance, agent or some insurance company? Okay, I'll find someone. Maybe I'll talk to Yona. I'll find people who are the best in the industry at what they're doing, learn from them, shortcut my learning curve and go, So now I realize like the whole world is just opened up, but I didn't have that mindset and then the sort of the courage back then.
Right. So there's this, famous kind of cliche that, I've heard ever since I was young, but I've heard recently some people kind of doubt on it, which is to say that you can accomplish anything that you put your mind to, right? And you have this, think and grow rich and the whole concepts of, the mindset that you're talking about, that if you want to accomplish something, you can. Do you subscribe to that? And if so, like,
Yeah.
how do you, really balance? And the question I'm really getting at here is, how do you balance the fact that some people just aren't cut out for certain types of jobs or certain types of things?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of ways I like to share with your listeners some of that. So it's all about frameworks. As I've gotten older, I don't think anyone is really wise. I think a lot of people have a lot of good experience, but the people I admire the most are people who have these really cool frameworks. I admire a guy named Alex Hormozi. I think his frameworks are really powerful. Naval Ravikant has some really good. Tim Ferriss has some frameworks, like Stephen Kotler, who's written a lot of really good novels, but sort of like flow state kind of books. And then, like people like a futurist, like Peter Diamandis, Tony Robbins. So what I've learned is I start having I call it the I3 philosophy. So I imitate a lot of people at the beginning of my life. And then I start iterating, slightly improving. Hey, man, Joe Fairless, he's done a really good job with Ashcroft. Okay, cool. Let me see what he's doing. Okay, got it. I think we should do the same. But hey, I see he's going in this direction. Maybe I can adjust our company to be a little bit different or even better. And eventually, these iterations build upon each other and they become innovations where I'm a completely different category. So like initially I thought, hey, let me bring coaching into the real estate company. But what I realized was it was slowing our real estate company down because our team was going after these coaching clients, which are nice. It's helpful. But compared to taking down a 200 unit deal, the ROI is not there. And so it was distracting my company. So I learned to slay the quote unquote the sacred cows, if you will. And I'm Hindu, so that's a big deal.
Right. You can't do that.
But it was interesting. So back to your question, I subscribe to the thing that, yes, we can learn anything, do anything, but there's zones of genius and there's zones of excellence. And a lot of people mistake the two. So there's too many, you can be good at a lot of things, but what are you so good at where it's effortless, where other people, it seems like work, but it's fun for you. And that's where you have an unfair advantage. And pound per pound, if you keep doing that one thing, you're going to outshine everybody else. And so I realized as a cardiologist and just studying hard and just being sort of well-rounded, I'm pretty good at a lot of things, but there's very few things I'm amazing at. And now I'm starting to let go and shed those things, outsource, delegate, automate, give to people on my team these things. And then I'm doubling down. So I realized there's a term I learned from Dan Sullivan and Strategic Coach. It talks about a visionary, an integrator. So I realized I am a visionary. I'm a person who has big ideas, big dreams, motivation. I can get big relationships. I can harness capital. But the day-to-day, I get bored. I'm not as detail-oriented. And so I've surrounded myself now with these people who are integrators. These are people who can execute on these ideas. And I've learned to, create teams and organizations around my ideas and my drive. And that's how I'm able to go faster, quicker. Like initially, I started a medical practice after I left traditional cardiology, and it was trying to help these people reverse those diseases I've mentioned. But I was trying to do it all myself. And we got to a point, we were hitting 7 figures, but it was like sucking the soul out of me. And now, like I have this company, Limitless MD, I have a whole team around me, and it was pretty easy to get to 7 figures. And a Viking, our goal is to get to 8 figures, and we're on track for that. And so it's like I took a vacation. I went to 3 weeks. I went to Crete, and I went to Santorini, and I went to Athens, and I went to Istanbul. I went to all Cappadocia, and I did all that, and both companies ran without me. And so I went from super frustrated, playing small, one input equals one output, to now ultimate leverage, ultimate freedom, and doing what I love and that I'm passionate about, but having a team help me.
Yeah. What would you say is your allocation of time at this point in the different companies that you run?
Yeah. So, if you go to any kind of business training or business school kind of thing, they teach you that these companies are like babies, like we all have these little babies, and start up as a baby, infant, toddler, teenager, and then sort of like an optimal adult, right? And then there's actually a decline cycle as well. But I realized that depending on where the company is, it creates certain freedoms and optionalities, and it takes the operator and eventually takes him to become an owner. And so I think that's a journey for all intelligent business owners, business entrepreneurs out there. Yeah. So I'm sure you're starting to create a team. When you first started this, you're probably a one-man army. And now it's like you have this huge support cast that helps you achieve what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true. It does take time, but it's like you said, it all goes back to the mindset shift and realizing that you can bring on team members. You can grow faster when you have, like as Dan Sullivan says, right, the who, not the how. And when you kind of focus your mind on that, you can really free up a ton of time to focus on the things that you're good at, the things that you actually enjoy doing. So
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
And then I think entrepreneurs sometimes forget like their emotions and their feelings are really good GPSs. And so I'll give you an example. I use two GPSs and they're opposite. One is use joy as your GPS, which is what the, sort of as a nice way of thinking about things. But also I use fear as my GPS. So I use joy and say, if it gives me joy, I definitely want to do it. But if I'm scared to do it, that's another reason why I need to do certain things. So a lot of times people fear things. And so I'm using fear as, hey, that's an opportunity I need to explore. That's something I need to learn to master. And then joy is good too, because you want to do things that make you happy. So those are the two sort of diametrically opposed things, but I use them as indicators of things to go after and accomplish. And one of the tenets I live by is it should be easy, lucrative, and fun. Life, like any business I'm touching, should be ELF, easy, lucrative, and fun. And then if a business is half, it's hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, I back away from it. So that's another mindset I use. And then the last one I use is anything I touch turns to gold, but I must touch one thing and I must touch it long enough.
I love all these acronyms and kind of different ways of looking at things. It really opens your mind up to exploring, life in a different way. I mean, really, when you have someone like yourself, obviously it comes through like coaching, right? You clearly are getting a lot of these things. You want to solidify these ideas so that you can give them over. And I find that acronyms are the best way to teach. You just remember them. Okay, I now know what half means. I now know what touch something turns to gold. We have to touch it long enough, right? And yeah, that's amazing. That's something that I'm going to remember.
And then, going back to what you're saying, hey, look, do you subscribe to the thing that, hey, anyone can do anything? That's true. Anyone can do anything. And that's the problem. Because anyone can do anything as long as they put their energy, people go after 3 targets, 5 targets, 10 targets, and they diffuse their power, their creativity, their energy, their focus. And that's why most people live mediocre lives and they live mediocre businesses because they're not all in laser focused. Now you can say, hey, Elon Musk is doing 19 different companies. True, but he probably started with one, made it a substantial success, built a team around it, and then his DNA is in the company, then he goes to the next one. So when you see people do multiple things all at once and they're successful, it's not really simultaneous, it's sequential.
Very true. And there are anomalies as well. I think Elon is a perfect example of an anomaly because there are not very many people like that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, even you go back to Alex Hormozi, you mentioned earlier on, right? He's talking about scaling, the $100 million offers and scaling different businesses. You're not doing it multiple businesses at a time, right? He talks about specifically how, the different layers of getting there and how to find the right people and attract attention. But you can only do that one company at a time, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you're running Viking Capital and you're running your health advisory and as well as a coaching, strategic coaching program that you've started as well. What is Viking? If you can break down the numbers to me, if you're willing to share, like what does Viking Capital look like now? I mean, you've been doing it since 2015 or so.
So in 2015, it was a side hustle, it was a hobby, and we're just helping some other folks, get deals done. And then in 2016, I had the realization, hey, look, we like to be owner operators, and we did it. But even then, I was still practicing full time, so it was still a side hobby. It was not until 2019 where I went full time into Viking. And once we did that, we were more of a linear company, then we became an exponential company. And we're almost about to finish our 24th acquisition. So we'll be at $750 million of deals acquired, assets. And then we'll have raised $250 million of equity. And, we're on track to hit, I think we're close to 6,000 units. And so, yeah, we're just steadily growing. We're in about 8 different markets, MSAs.
That's pretty amazing. And along the time, right? It's like you said, it's been about building those teams and finding the right people to run those businesses, run those companies.
Yeah. And I think the next 5 years will be a lot faster than the first 5 and then there's always going to be, the bigger you get, the harder to keep that rate of growth. But this is where you want to think like an exponential organization. So I've been digging really into this, like I signed up for this 6-month AI mastery course because I really want to understand this. I want to understand this new technology and see how it can apply to our businesses. And, could it be a waste of time? Could be, but this is something like, there's all these things on my plate, but this is where I prioritize. I'm like, I think this one thing, if I learn it, it could change everything. So I don't mind delaying, procrastinating. So procrastination is a good thing, Yona. A lot of people think of it as a bad thing. The key is, what do you procrastinate on? And so procrastinate on, like, if tasks are worth $1, 50 cents, 25 cents, 10 cents, a penny, most people procrastinate on things that are worth $1 and do the penny task.
Right.
Right. So flip that and you'll really use procrastination to your benefit. Procrastination is really 80-20 in reverse.
Fascinating. Meaning you focus on the 20% of the things and you'll get 80% of the results.
Right. And when you procrastinate, you focus on the 80.
Right.
And don't do the 20.
Yeah. It really is fascinating. And you're talking about a difference between, a penny and $1. I mean, when you multiply that, it's exponential, especially when you're focusing on more of those dollars and less pennies. Fascinating. Vikram, I want to transition now to what we call the final four, right? These are 4 questions I ask all my guests. First question for you is, what is the worst job that you ever had?
It was my first job. I was in high school and I was a busboy at Ruby Tuesdays restaurant. And initially it was really cool because, you're back there, you're hanging out with the kitchen staff. It's all fun. But some of the things that made it more challenging were, I was the man that would clean the restrooms. And so that was pretty challenging.
Right.
And the second thing that made it really challenging was responsible for managing the salad bar. And what would happen is on these Sundays, people go to church, they go to synagogue, they go and they come back, they're famished, they're hungry. And they're not like a few people. They're like, these people come in like droves of 10, 20 people. And I have this pristine salad bar. I mean, it's gorgeous. I mean, the angles of the spoons are just right. And, the cherry tomatoes look like a pyramid. And they just destroy and wreak havoc on my creation of my salad bar. And then my manager comes by and he's like, dude, I told you to get the salad bar in order. And I'm like, I was. And then the last thing that really broke my back was, I think minimum wage at that time was like $4 or $5 an hour. And they would pay me like $2 an hour. And then they expected the waitresses to split our tips so we'd hit our minimum wage.
Wow.
And that was a lot of like faith on my part that the waitresses would do that with us. And so, but it taught me a lot of skills, a lot of, insights. And I still remember it. And it's fun and it's a story. And my kids will never know that, even though I want them to, but it's good.
Yeah, that's challenging. It's oftentimes people's first jobs that is like the worst one. Yeah, but that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, and the lessons that we learn from these early jobs really carry us through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Busboy. Awesome. Second question, what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift? And I know you've already mentioned several amazing books, but I'd love to hear what you have to say here.
Nothing fails like success, Yona. And one of the books that helped me realize that specifically is because, there's a period of time where like I was like sort of like not comfortable, but like, there's obviously, I'm small compared to so many other entrepreneurs out there who've really crushed it. Maybe they're at $1 billion, maybe they have like, 5 companies, or maybe they're like, I don't know what the run rate is for the revenue, but it's, there's always someone who's always going to be better than you. So, but I felt like I was in a good space. And I was trying to like, I used to get up at 4:45. That was like my thing, like getting up at 4:45 every day, beating up the sun, going after it, and like working out in the morning, meditating, and doing my like, deep work on my companies. And it was important. But then I noticed I was starting to slack. I was trying to sleep in a little bit more. I was like, all right, I don't have anything pressing. There's no big event coming up. I can maybe take it easy. And I felt like I was going a little soft. And I read a book by David Goggins called Never Finished. And it's his second book. This first book, if you haven't read it, it's called You Can't Hurt Me. And it's pretty intense. I mean, just listen, and I'd recommend listening to the audiobook because he does it sort of as an audiobook / podcast. It's so powerful, so riveting. And I still remember almost every detail of it. And I thought, oh man, this second book's gonna be good. And he also was going through this like slump where he got some success now. He's got a famous book, he's published, people know him, he's on social media. And he started getting a little comfortable. And it's about how his journey to like awaken, quote unquote, the savage within. And you don't need to be a savage, you don't need to be that, but there's an inner beast, if you will. There's an inner warrior that we all have, and you don't want them that you can still work, but you can work intelligently, but don't let that fire get extinguished. And so that's what I learned from it. And now I'm just back into it. I mean, I'm not as intense as I was before, but I'm still as motivated.
And that's important. I think almost every entrepreneur has that stage at least once at some point in their life where they've realized a certain amount of success and they kind of feel like comfortable and like plateaued. And it can be like a slump in a lot of ways because you don't feel motivated. So I'm very eager to actually check that book out.
Yeah.
Something that I can definitely relate to as well, and probably most people. So thank you for sharing that. We'll put that in the show notes for anyone else who wants to check that out. David Goggins, if you haven't checked it out. Third question, what's a skill or talent that you would like to learn?
Along this, there's two things. Like there's my normal mode that I'm living in life. Then there's what I call monk mode, where I'm like, really sort of not as social with the world. I'm not as, interacting, and I'm really focusing on some big project, or I'm really trying to do some self work on myself. Right. And then the other mode I have is called beast mode, where I'm like, all right, I'm all out. I'm interacting with everyone, but I'm like really, trying to give it my all on a project. And so it's like more external energies and more internal energies. And so right now I'm in this thing mode where like I'm like really trying to do the monk mode, where I'm like internally more focused. And one of the things is I want to acquire skills that will help me in life. And so I think flexibility, strength, and physical fitness are very important. I don't like running. I don't like yoga as much. So I thought, what could I get to get the same results? So I'm taking on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, cool.
And it's pretty fun, and I really like it. So combining that, I've already done Muay Thai. So that with this is sort of like me. It's a cauldron. It's a arena where I can have these fierce competitive energies, but it's helping my body. I mean, I'm 45 at this point. So how do I maintain this high level of health for the rest of my life? And so I've noticed even a lot of successful business folks, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk included, who are starting to get into like competitive martial arts such as, MMA or jiu-jitsu and things like that. So it's an interesting caveat, but I think always giving yourself a challenge of some sort is helpful. Like last year I did Kilimanjaro. And so that was my challenge. Wow. So this year I'm doing the martial arts thing. So I think you should always have these 90-day goals, 12-month goals, 6-month goals outside of business that keep pushing you.
Sure. That's amazing. A side question there on the Kilimanjaro. Did you have to train for that in any way, or you just tackled it?
Absolutely. I'm not going to try to show that I'm like some super athlete. It was hard. I thought it was going to be easier than it was. I had a team, an expedition that helped me. And in fact, it was 6 of us that went up there, and we had a team of 30 people supporting us to get up there. And we had some ultra athletes, we had runners, we had triathletes, we had, people who live in Denver who are used to altitude. And half of us were fine. We got up there, and the other half required oxygen just to make it up there. So definitely an impressive thing. Anyone want to reach out to me, use my contact info. I'll share with you exactly how, if you ever want to do something like that.
Very cool. Amazing. Fourth and final question. What does success mean to you?
Success means to me is just unlocking your restrictions, unlocking your limiting beliefs, and just being the highest and best version of yourself. It's unlocking your best and then living a life that you're proud of, living a life that's legendary, that's epic, that you make a dent in the universe, and you're running the race. It's a race with yourself and not with anyone else. Comparison is the thief of joy. If I try to compare to you, Yona, maybe I feel inadequate. If I compare to other people in the industry, maybe I feel better than them. Maybe I feel less than them. So stop doing all that comparison. Just know that it's a solo race. There may be other people there, but it's a solo race. And just be better than you were the year before, the month before, the week before.
Love that. That's amazing. Vikram, this has really been amazing. A pleasure speaking to you and hearing from you and your journey and everything like that. How can our listeners find you or reach out to you if they want?
Yeah, absolutely. My real estate company is Viking Capital, and it's vikingmultifamily.com. And if they want to reach out to me personally, it's my personal website. It's vikramraya.com, VIKRAMRAYA.com. Love
it. Amazing. Well, I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. And I'm just always surprised how fast this goes by. It just flew by. Had a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And to our listeners, I want to thank you once again for joining us all the way to the end of this podcast. I hope you got a lot of value out of this. I certainly did. And remember, until next time, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn, send me a DM, connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.